Triple H was crying. Let that land with the full devastating weight it carries before we move a single step further into this breakdown, because everything that follows requires you to understand from the very first moment what kind of announcement produces tears from the most powerful man in professional wrestling. The chief content officer of WWE, the cerebral assassin, the man who built his entire career and his entire post-career organizational identity on a foundation of absolute controlled composure that has never once in public cracked beyond what he chose to show. Triple H does not cry. Triple H processes. Triple H strategizes. Triple H channels whatever he feels into action and direction, and the kind of relentless forward momentum that has defined everything he has ever built inside and outside that ring across 3 decades of extraordinary contribution to professional wrestling at every level of its operation. And yet there he stood, in front of cameras, in front of the press, in front of the WWE Universe that was already holding its breath and barely holding itself together after weeks of devastating news surrounding Paul Heyman, with tears that he was not attempting to conceal and not attempting to manage and not attempting to channel into anything except the specific, human, completely unperformable grief of a man who has just come from a hospital room where his closest friend is fighting for his life after Seth Rollins' brutal Raw attack left him broken and paralyzed and clinging to a survival outcome that the medical professionals surrounding him have been consistently unable to guarantee with the kind of certainty that the people who love Paul Heyman desperately need someone to provide. What Triple H announced at that hospital today is going to make you cry. It is going to make you angry. It is going to make you feel every complicated, overwhelming, impossible to organize emotion that a moment of this magnitude produces in people who have invested years of genuine passion and genuine love into a man who gave professional wrestling more than it will ever be able to fully repay. This is Ring Grumble 1, and we are not looking away from a single word of it. We have to establish the full picture of where things stand with Paul Heyman medically, because the context of his condition is absolutely essential to understanding the full weight and the full significance of what Triple H announced at that hospital today. Paul Heyman was rushed to medical care following Seth Rollins' Raw attack, an assault that we have described on this channel in the full detail its horror deserves, a deliberately targeted, specifically executed act of violence designed by the most analytically precise mind currently operating in professional wrestling to produce the maximum possible permanent damage to Paul Heyman's capacity to continue existing as the force he has been in this industry. The paralysis that resulted from Seth's attack was the immediate and most dramatic physical consequence of what was done to Paul Heyman on that Raw broadcast. But paralysis, devastating as it is in its immediate implications for a man whose entire professional existence has been built on the motion and the energy and the relentless forward propulsion of a mind that never stops, paralysis was not the full extent of the medical crisis that Seth Rollins' attack initiated. The weeks since that Raw attack have been a medical journey whose details WWE and Paul Heyman's personal representatives have managed with the careful, protective discretion that serious medical situations demand, and that the people who love Paul Heyman have every right to expect from an organization that owes him more than it can reasonably repay. What information has emerged from that careful management has been sufficient to communicate the general shape of an extraordinarily serious medical situation without providing the specific clinical detail that would satisfy the community's desperate appetite for reassurance that Paul Heyman is going to be okay. And the absence of that reassurance, the carefully worded updates that communicated seriousness without providing resolution, created the specific, sustained, genuinely agonizing uncertainty that the WWE Universe has been living in since Raw. An uncertainty that Triple H's hospital announcement today either resolves or deepens beyond anything we have yet been prepared to face. Triple H arrived at that hospital today, and I want you to understand what it means for the chief content officer of WWE to personally appear at a medical facility where one of his most significant professional and personal relationships is playing out its most critical chapter. Triple H has organizational responsibilities that do not pause for personal crisis. He has a WrestleMania season to manage, a roster of superstars whose storylines and programming require his creative and organizational attention, an institution whose commercial and creative momentum must be maintained regardless of what is happening in any individual's personal world. The fact that Triple H prioritized a personal hospital visit over any and all of those organizational responsibilities communicates something about the nature of his relationship with Paul Heyman and the severity of what is happening in that hospital room that no official statement or carefully worded press release could communicate as clearly or as honestly. Triple H and Paul Heyman go back further than most professional wrestling observers fully remember or fully appreciate in the current context of their organizational roles within WWE's structure. These are not simply professional colleagues whose careers intersected usefully. These are men whose histories in professional wrestling are genuinely, deeply intertwined. Men who competed against each other and worked alongside each other and challenged each other and disagreed with each other and ultimately arrived at a shared understanding of professional wrestling's potential and its responsibilities that only people who have both devoted themselves completely and permanently to this industry at the highest level can truly develop and share. Triple H visiting Paul Heyman in the hospital is not a PR move. It is not an organizational obligation being fulfilled through personal presence. It is a friend who is terrified showing up because showing up is the only thing available when the people you love most are in places that your organizational power and your strategic brilliance cannot reach. The announcement itself was delivered outside the hospital. Triple H facing cameras and reporters and the WWE Universe representatives who had gathered because word had spread that something significant was about to be communicated. Facing all of that with the tears he was not attempting to hide and the specific weight of a man carrying news that he has been processing privately and now must make public regardless of what it costs him personally to do so. And what Triple H announced has layers, heartbreaking layers that unfold in sequence with the specific structure of news that contains both devastation and something else, something that sits alongside the devastation and makes the totality of what was announced simultaneously harder and more complicated to process than pure tragedy would be. Triple H announced first that Paul Heyman's medical condition has stabilized in ways that the team surrounding him did not dare predict with confidence in the immediate aftermath of Seth Rollins' Raw attack. That the paralysis, while still present and still representing an enormous and life-altering medical reality for a man whose physical existence was previously defined by such extraordinary energy and motion, has not progressed in the ways that the most feared medical scenarios in the aftermath of the attack had suggested it might. That Paul Heyman is alive, is conscious, and this is the detail that Triple H delivered with a voice that broke completely and did not recover for a long moment, is asking about professional wrestling. Is asking about the stories and the characters and the organizational developments that have been unfolding in his absence as if the obsessive, ceaselessly engaged mind that Seth Rollins tried to silence permanently cannot be silenced even by the physical consequences of what was done to it. Paul Heyman is asking about wrestling. From a hospital bed, paralyzed. After everything Seth Rollins did to him. He is asking about wrestling. If that does not make you cry, then I genuinely do not know what to tell you, because that specific detail, more than any clinical update, more than any organizational statement, more than any of the formal language that surrounds medical announcements of this magnitude, that detail is Paul Heyman in its most essential and most irreducible form. A man whose relationship with professional wrestling is so fundamental and so completely woven into the fabric of who he is that even the most extreme physical trauma Seth Rollins was capable of delivering cannot sever the connection between Paul Heyman's consciousness and the industry he has devoted his life to. Paul Heyman asking about wrestling from a hospital bed is Paul Heyman refusing, at the most basic neurological level of conscious engagement with the world, to be separated from the thing that makes him most fully himself regardless of what has been done to his body. Seth Rollins attacked Paul Heyman's body. He could not attack what makes Paul Heyman Paul Heyman. And the hospital room detail that Triple H shared with tears running down his face outside that medical facility today is the proof of that specific, extraordinary, genuinely inspiring resilience operating at the deepest possible level of human identity and human devotion to purpose. But Triple H's announcement also contained the other layer. The devastating layer that sits alongside the stabilization news and the Paul Heyman asking about wrestling detail and makes the totality of what was announced impossible to receive as simply hopeful or simply encouraging. Because the medical reality of Paul Heyman's paralysis, even with the stabilization, even with the absence of the most feared progression scenarios, is a reality that has permanent implications for his capacity to return to professional wrestling in the form and the manner and the fullness of engagement that his contributions to this industry have always taken. The paralysis is not resolved. The road from where Paul Heyman is right now to any version of return to the professional wrestling world, in any capacity, on any timeline, is a road whose length and whose difficulty and whose ultimate destination the medical professionals surrounding him are not yet able to map with the confidence and the specificity that the people who love him and the industry that needs him are desperately seeking. Triple H said, And this is the part that sent every camera in that press gathering searching for the specific expression on his face that the words produced, because the words alone were not sufficient to carry their weight. That he does not know when he will have Paul Heyman back. That the medical reality of the situation is one whose timeline is determined by Paul's body and Paul's neurological recovery and the specific, unpredictable biology of healing from the kind of trauma Seth Rollins delivered, and not by anyone's desire for a different outcome or anyone's organizational need for Paul Heyman to return to the industry he has given everything to. Triple H does not know when he will have Paul Heyman back. And the chief content officer of WWE saying those words outside a hospital with tears on his face is the single most heartbreaking image professional wrestling has produced in the modern era of this company. The WWE Universe's response to Triple H's hospital announcement has been exactly what Paul Heyman's relationship with this community deserves: immediate, genuine, overwhelming, and completely free of the performative dimension that sometimes characterizes fan responses to significant WWE news. People are crying, not because a wrestling storyline told them to, not because a creative direction manufactured the emotional conditions for a grief response. Because a real person who gave them real joy and real intelligence and real elevation of something they love is lying in a hospital bed, and the man who just came from that bed could not stop his own tears while telling them what he saw there. That is the specific, irreplaceable, completely genuine connection that Paul Heyman built with the WWE Universe across decades of work. The connection that makes his current situation produce real tears from real people rather than the performed empathy that entertainment typically generates. Paul Heyman earned those tears. Every promo, every client relationship, every creative contribution, every moment of genuine brilliance that he brought to an industry that needed it. All of that earned the real, human, unmanageable grief that Triple H's announcement produced today. Seth Rollins has to answer for this. Not in a ring. Not in a match with stipulations. In every genuine sense of accountability that a professional community can demand from someone whose choices produced this outcome for someone this irreplaceable and this beloved. WrestleMania season continues. The organizational machinery of WWE continues. But it continues in the shadow of a hospital room where Paul Heyman is asking about wrestling he cannot yet return to, and Triple H is standing outside with tears he cannot contain, and the entire WWE Universe is sitting with the specific, permanent grief of loving someone and knowing that what was done to them cannot be undone by desire or by love or by the kind of organizational power that Triple H has spent his entire post-career building. Paul Heyman is fighting. The asking about wrestling detail proves it. And WrestleSphere, Ring Grumble 1, is going to be here to cover every single development of that fight with the honesty and the passion and the complete refusal to look away that Paul Heyman's legacy and Paul Heyman's current battle both completely deserve. I need every single one of you in those comments right now with your reaction to Triple H's hospital announcement and what it produced in you emotionally. Share your Paul Heyman memory. Share the moment he made you understand what professional wrestling could be when operating at its absolute highest level. This community processes this together. Share this video everywhere immediately, because Paul Heyman's fight deserves the attention and the support of every corner of the professional wrestling world. Like this video. Subscribe to Ring Grumble 1. Turn on every notification, because we are covering every development of this story with everything we have. Ring Grumble 1. When the greatest mind in wrestling fights the hardest battle of his life, we make sure the world is watching and supporting every single step. Always.